PNT Open Mind Insights brings you powerful, authentic conversations, illuminating the path to better mental health care for all.
So, welcome, Gulshan. I'm so excited to talk with you for this interview series. I have known you about 4 years now, I think, and
Yes.
have been following your work in that time and had the great fortune to interview you multiple times on the work that you're doing. And I'm just so excited to share this with our particular audience today
Mhm.
because what you're doing is so unique and so important.
Mhm.
So, just tell me briefly, what is it that you do and what is the population that you're serving?
Yeah, well, thank you first of all, Adam, for yet another interview. It's always a pleasure to see you and talk to you, and wonderful to see all the wonderful work that you're doing. So I'm the executive director of a nonprofit that focuses on wellness and mental health for the refugee and immigrant communities in Sacramento and throughout California, and it's called the Mass Social Services Foundation.
And then tell me a little bit about the challenges that your particular population are experiencing and why it's so important to provide services to this group.
Yeah, so a lot of refugees and immigrants, and when I talk about that, let me break it down a little bit. I'm talking about people from Afghanistan, all the Arab countries, whether it's Muslim or non-Muslim, which are about 20 countries, Pakistan, India. These are all fall in the category of immigrants and refugees, and a lot of them reside in Sacramento and California, and of course throughout the U.S. But there's a high concentration now of refugees in Sacramento, and as of 2021, over 100,000 refugees were placed in U.S. because of U.S. pulling out of Afghanistan after a 20-year war. And so for that reason, about 36-38% are now in Sacramento. And these are just the Afghan refugees. In addition to that, you have a high population of Arab refugees, and then definitely lots of immigrants from Pakistan and India here. But with that said, a lot of the challenges that they're constantly seeing is the traumas that they've endured back home. So if you look at people from Afghanistan who has been in war for over 40 years, they've been born, raised, and gotten older and in war, and now they're resettled in the U.S. Or you look at the Arab communities. Let's look at Syrians that came in 2014 into Sacramento, Iraqis, and many other Arab countries. They're all coming from war-torn countries, and so a lot of time, of course, what happens is all the traumas that they've endured, whether it's a bomb blowing up around them, families constantly dying. When they come here, their first thing is to get resettled, get a home, get their kids connected, themselves. But as they resettle, the traumas that they've been affected with come back.
Mm-hmm.
And while they might be ignoring it before, or just, they start to come back and they start um, to interfere with their lives as they always have. But now that they're in a country where they could finally um, calmly live a life, these issues come about. And in addition to that, there's lots of Islamophobia that is well and alive, unfortunately, in the United States. And so, for those reasons, a lot of these refugees come with a lot of mental health issues, and then they don't really stop here. And that's the adults. Now let's look at the children. The over 100,000 that I mentioned that I came into U.S. and 36 to 38 placed in Sacramento, 50% of those are children and youth.
Mm.
And so Sacramento right now has a huge children and youth population of refugees that have come in. And so for all those reasons, there's lots and lots of issues that we're seeing at Mass SSF. Initially, when a lot of the refugees come in, they test you out because there's a lot of trust issues.
Mm.
They come in for everything under the sun, but I'm seeing in the last couple of years that they're coming in for the really serious issues which are more clinical, more services that are needed from therapists. So whether it's schizophrenia, whether it's bipolar, whether it's depression, and we're seeing a high number of those now coming in. And this is after they've tested us out and seen, okay, we care, we actually want to help them. We're here to support them. And then they start to open up. We also have a process where we're able to do an intake to assess where are they in their mental health challenges.
Mhm. So, what is the cost of not addressing these
Mm.
challenges?
Well, there are many costs, right? So, as a community, the cost is that you have a community that continues to be in pain.
Mm,
As a family, you have the cost that your family is going to slowly break down. I've seen this in my own life where coming in as a kid, when I was a refugee myself, you don't know what is trauma. You don't know what's happening. You're just trying to survive and you're trying to listen to your parents or to each other as adults and survive. What eventually happens is that the traumas that you've seen do slowly break you down
mm,
and the families start to break out and break down. If you look at a lot of the refugee families, there are a lot of issues. The difference is that culturally, everyone keeps quiet.
mm,
But within the households, there is a lot of problems. Um, and so, whether it's divorce, whether it's mental health issues, whether it's issues with children, and keep in mind there's that intergenerational trauma that passes down from the parents to the children. And again, nobody knows what's happening, but they're trying to survive. I saw this happening throughout since I was a child, and I think I can say a person who's been in the field for 20 years, I realized what was happening in my 30s.
oh, wow.
That it took me that long to realize that what my family is going through and what the people around me are going through are the traumas that's been inflicted on them and it's showing. And I got to see that it is happening throughout the community. So yeah, so it's many times people don't know what is happening. So there's a cost to the community, there's a cost to the family, and also I would like to include the schools because the schools are affected quite a lot right now. The youth are having major issues right now in the school district in Sacramento, the ones that are impacted rather by the refugee population of not only violence but mental health issues and just simply not doing well in school. Of course, there's a linguistic aspect of not understanding the language, but there's more than that happening right now in the school districts. And then I'd say system wide, it would be the cost of not preventing or educating the community about why it's important to seek services, and even more important, why it's important to seek services early on. The cost of that is going to be huge for the system. And right now, there are mental health practices that have been proven to alleviate that.
And you're doing it.
Yeah.
So, I just want to take a little step back. You mentioned that you have lived experience in this
Mhm.
area yourself. Can you tell me about how you came to dedicate your career to helping this population and how your journey brought you to this place of helping others?
Mhm. Absolutely. So just like any female or any Middle Eastern or Afghan woman, I'd say you're told at home, okay, you have to go to school, you have to become a doctor, you have to become an engineer, and that's what you strive for. And so at 18, when I was admitted to UC Davis, University of Davis, my focus was on computer science,
Hmm.
simply because it makes a lot of money and it made sense. Right? As an 18-year-old, what do you know, right? And then eventually I saw, as I was going to school, that certain things that I was seeing in my family or in my own life was interfering. And I got to see what was happening in terms of my wellness. And so it from there, then I saw some episodes with my own family members in terms of suicide, in terms of mental health issues. And that's when I just stopped and I took another look at what I was doing, how my life was. And of course, none of these things go as planned, and none of thing in life, as I've seen, goes as planned. So whether it's God or the universe, it always has a different plan for you than you think.
Mm-hmm.
And so I ended up taking time off. And then eventually I started at a nonprofit that was focusing on mental health. And I was doing event planning there initially. But then I got to see what was happening in that organization and how it was relating to what I had been seeing all my life. And then, even more importantly, in my second job after the first mental health job, was that at a place that they focused on individuals who had gone through difficulties, and now it was moving. The idea of recovery being possible was a main focus, and that's called. There's an evidence-based practice called peer support,
Mm.
and it's a movement that's been happening since the '60s, and now it is been shown as an evidence-based practice since 2008, and it is being practiced throughout the United States. And so when I got to learn more about that, then I was able to connect and see, wow, yeah, this makes a lot of sense, and there is hope, and there is a path towards recovery. And so from there, I got to connect what I had gone through and my family had gone through, and then eventually I utilized that experience when I got to Mass SSF, um, to apply it to the Dubai community, which is the Middle East and South Asian North African communities, and seeing that there is a practice that can help them actually understand that they need to take care of themselves and that there is a solution and hope towards recovery, towards getting better.
So it seems like it was kind of like what would you call it? Like a discovery
Mm-hmm.
or putting the pieces together sort of
Mm-hmm.
in your mind as you started out, had a traumatic experience being a
Mm-hmm.
refugee yourself, and then not quite understanding. I can relate to this, not really
Mm-hmm.
understanding until you're in your 30s or so
Yeah.
how everything all plays out. And then you made this cognitive connection of like how you can be of service. But some people may make those connections and not go into service. What
Mm-hmm.
what is the driver as your heart?
Mm. Yeah.
Gulshan's heart. What
Yeah.
is that driver that makes you dedicate your life?
Yeah. I think I honestly want to get up every day and do what I love, and that is what I have now. So I think it's just having a fulfilling life, and for me, this is it. This fulfills me every day, all day long, even on the days when I have them are the most stressful. Knowing that I mean, it sounds too cliche to say this, but knowing that I'm doing something that's helping someone, there is nothing like it. And I think it also comes from the fact that when you have seen a lot of challenges in life and you have been helpless, um, I'm realizing it all of a sudden, actually, just right now when you're asking, which is another thing in life. It some things just hit you at in a moment when the right person asks the right question.
Yeah.
So I think when throughout life when you see challenges but you're a bit helpless, and then finally when you see you have a little bit of power in you to change things, you grab onto it. And so I think maybe that probably was the most, but the one that I know why I did it was because I want a fulfilling life. I think I know I'm so grateful and blessed that I'm in a country, in a place where I could make these things happen.
Hmm.
And I'm from a family. My mother, who's never gone to school a day in her life, always encouraged me to make sure I do well. And my father was educated. Actually, he got his master's in the U.S. In the '70s. I always looked up to him, but it was my mother, who I have a lot of complaints about, as most mother and daughters
Yeah.
have. But she's the one who drove me to always do well.
Hmm.
But yeah, I think I would say those would probably be the reason.
Yeah. And also, I want to point out that Gulshan is doing something that's very unique in the United States, too.
Hmm.
Serving this particular population
Mhm.
for mental health services specifically is very unique and very important work. And you're, the leader, the driver. and affecting so many people. So I'm just so grateful for you. And I can relate too, like
Mhm.
gone through trauma as a child, and then when you experience healing yourself, you want to share it with other people because you're
Mhm.
like, wow, I've discovered something that can help other people.
Mhm.
So I just really appreciate that about what you're doing.
Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. It's been so good to know you.
Yeah.
Now, let's talk a little bit about, some of the solutions and things that you've discovered. And we have such a large population of refugees here in Sacramento and California and even in the nation. And, we see them around, and doctors and providers are coming into contact with them
Mhm.
frequently. Um, what can you share with us about how we can support these people better?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think starts from the main thing, which is trust. Um, Knowing about someone's background before serving them is very important. Understanding their culture is very important. Um, Not assuming that they know what's happening is very, very important. I also am learning this. Although I'm Afghan, although I've came here as a refugee as a child, I've learned a lot in the last, I'd say, 2 3 years when the a huge influx of refugees came, that of how important it is to meet the person where they're at. I'll give a really quick example of something I experienced just last week. Uh, we had a person come in who had been here 4 months, a male, young male, and he had a wife and children. And my assistant told me, Gulshan, he doesn't have food.
Mm,
And so, because generally, of course, staff would help him. But the moment she said that, I said, okay, let me talk to him. I sat down with him and I asked him these questions about, okay, when did you come? When do how do you, what do you need? And I asked, do you have food? And he said, yes, I do.
mm,
And I knew he didn't. But to
mm,
me, because of being a male, because of being, someone who's a provider, talking to a female from the same culture, right away, he said, no, I have it. So I said,
mm,
okay, let me, and I got what he was doing. And so I gave it another try. And I said, okay, my father went through the same thing as you when I was a kid. I remember we came to the United States and we didn't, all we had was like rice and maybe a little bit of something else with it of our first, and I remember my dad telling me that when I was a kid, and our first meal when we had it here, that's where we're going to eat. So I said, I addressed it again to him. I said, I'm going to ask you very specific, and please don't be embarrassed because my dad went through the same thing. Do you have milk for your kids? Do you have bread? And everything I asked, he didn't have it. All he had was vegetables
mm,
and nothing else. And
mm,
because he had not gotten the benefits yet, he had not been set up yet, because generally, when a refugee is admitted to the US, they go to the resettlement agencies to get support. And they get support for about 90 days. Unfortunately, right now, the resettlement agencies' funding has been frozen, and they cannot help refugees that have been here for a while now or the new ones. And so it was even a more severe case.
mm.
Yeah.
Wow. So having some knowledge of the culture
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
going to be pretty
It's very
important.
important, and if I may continue, because when I
Please,
go
yeah.
into an example, I lose the point,
Yeah, yeah.
especially one that's very, very sad. So yeah, so in terms of what the question was, what should they know, right? In terms
Yeah,
of
like health providers,
health
mental health
providers.
providers specifically, but this, we're also talking about primary care physicians who
Hmm.
are coming into contact with people.
Yeah,
What is there such a thing as cliff notes on these that people can kind of
I mean
learn
there
and
is, what I really dislike is when everyone talks about let's have a cultural competence training.
yeah, tell
I'm from
me.
the country and I'm not 100% culturally competent.
Okay.
It's about learning more about the culture of the person, but just meeting them where they are. So, for example, I think when client comes in that does not speak the language, making sure that interpreters exactly from the country that they're from.
Mhm.
Right now, there has been many problems, even death, that have occurred because they have gone interpreters for an Afghan client that was Iranian.
Mm.
It's two different countries. This idea that all Middle Eastern people are the same and they speak, it's just not good. Making sure that the interpreter is, and then breaking it down even more, not only from the country, but from the language and the area they're from, if possible.
Mm.
All of these make a huge difference in terms of communication and comfort.
Mhm.
So, if you take Afghanistan as an example, there are two languages and lots of different ethnic groups. Um, while most of the time one might think, okay, well, that's just a problem within the country, and it is because it creates a lot of division. But when it comes to the individual who's going through the mental health issue, it is comfort. And
Mm.
without comfort, you cannot move forward. That's
Mhm.
how they've been taught that the person from my region, from my language, is the one that I'm going to listen to and talk to. And
Mhm.
that's what I mean by meeting a person there.
So that leads very well into this idea
Hmm.
of peer support,
Hmm.
which is something that you work with a lot. Tell us about peer support.
Hmm.
What does it mean? How it can be utilized to serve people better?
Yeah, and so peer support is something, like I mentioned earlier, that has really changed my life and the way I do things in life and in my career. And so, as of 2008, it is an evidence based practice that's been proven cost wise and also a result in terms of recovery, healing, that it works for those who have had trauma and who've had mental health problems. And it is something now being practiced. I believe it's a bill that backed this up, SB 903, I'm forgetting the bill number. So throughout the United States, peer support is a form of support and practice for anyone who's going through mental health challenges. And it is focused on prevention. And
Mm.
that's the key here.
Mm.
But we have to keep in mind it is not for those who are already diagnosed or clinically ill, where they need a therapist.
Mhm.
But what I've learned is that, so for the community that I'm serving, it works really well because majority of them, whether you're Arab, Afghan, Pakistani, it doesn't matter. They have endured so much trauma that this practice really works because what happens is we at MassF have trained over 101 community members to become peer support specialists.
Mm.
So when a community member steps into our agency, they see someone that looks like them, speaks like them, understands them. But they are trained, the peer support specialists, to talk to them from a perspective of mental health without bringing the word mental health even once.
Mhm.
When we do an intake, we are assessing for where are they in their mental health journey. But they're not being told this, but they're feeling comfortable. Comes back to comfort and familiarity. And so once they're able to go ahead and feel that connection with the staff, they're able to talk. And so this practice is being used for those who are not diagnosed, who are not at that point. But when we see, and we do have this as well in our agency, that somebody is in a has serious mental health issues and have been diagnosed, then we definitely have a therapist see them. But again, in the mental health workforce, there's a lack of therapists, and on top of that, those who could speak and understand their various different languages, whether it's our community, the community that I'm serving, or other communities. If you look at underserved communities like African American, Native American, and so forth, all of them have a lack of therapists. Mass SSF is actually part of a very huge project that was started in California in 2009, I believe. It's called the California Reducing Disparities Project, where California was the first one, a very innovative idea that focused on practices that heal the underserved communities. As a result of that, that was in 2009, and as a result of that, now 35 agencies are working on such practices, and we're one of them. And in 2024, the statewide evaluation team that was hired by the state for this project announced that those 35 agencies, which includes African Americans, LGBT community, Latin, Asian American, Native American, they're saving California $335 million,
Oh, wow.
which is huge and
Yeah.
it's amazing, right? It's just, so we're part of that, but eventually But when it and another thing I've learned also between understanding peer and then clinical, which is your therapist, psychiatrist, so forth, is that for underserved communities, you need both.
Okay.
You need both to be able to help them move towards their healing for the reason that of the culture and also in terms of severity. So an integrated model of peer and clinical.
Mhm.
So if you take a person who has, let's say, schizophrenia and is from one of those underserved communities, they will be best served, from my experience and what we do at MassF, with a therapist, hopefully that speaks their language, but if not, and that's usually the case, also a peer support specialist, because that peer support specialist will help them with the cultural needs and other basic needs while understanding the mental health part. And
Mhm.
then the therapist is going to help them with the actual therapy. And both, if they are moving simultaneously, I think would increase the client's recovery chances a lot more.
Mhm. Yeah. I'm curious, what does that look like in practice? Would this be the peer support specialist actually going to the therapy appointment with them?
Mhm.
Or it means like collaborating outside of those appointments? Or what is that? How does that work?
Yeah. Mm. It's a very good question. So yeah, I think for any underserved community, especially refugees and immigrants, um, having, of course, it's up to the client's choice, but having the therapist and the peer support specialist work together would be the best solution from what we've
Like
seen.
in person, like all together in the
All in
same room?
person,
Okay.
all in person. And the peer support specialist is able to help with the language and the cultural aspect, and then also other basic needs. And then, of course, the clinical focuses on the therapy aspect.
Mhm.
I'll give a quick example to make my point here. A client, let's say with schizophrenia and bipolar, with some mania in there, from a country, and this happens a lot with new refugees, who doesn't speak English, doesn't understand the system at all, has no support, because that's usually what happens when they're coming here. Uh, the therapist is needed and it's critical because of what they've been diagnosed with. But the peer support specialist is able to check in with them every other day to see how they're doing, speaking to them in their language,
Mhm.
interpret in the therapy session for them as well. But outside of that, check in with them and
Mhm.
see how they're doing, because the client has no idea what's happening in terms of mental health. The client has no idea what's going on in the system,
Yeah.
and the client, all they're told is that they're crazy,
Oh.
which is not the case. Everybody has a chance to recover. No one's crazy, and there is a lot of hope. And the peer support specialists are trained not only on the mental health aspect, but primarily on empowering the client and instilling hope in them. So, with this example that I'm describing, the peer support specialists and the therapists can really together work well in an integrated way to help the client move towards recovery. I think that is a much better chance of the client surviving and living a well balanced life,
Mhm.
or a life in the United States, than either focusing on just the peer specialist or just the therapist.
Mhm. Well, this makes a lot of sense. So what you're
Hmm.
telling me, it seems like it's unreasonable to expect like any one provider to learn every single thing there is about every single culture out there.
Hmm.
I mean, you want to learn as much as you can,
Exactly.
but it sounds like from your perspective, you're saying, why don't we bring in peers? Why don't we bring in
Hmm.
extra support so that we can be sure that
Hmm.
we're meeting people where they're at and the needs that they have.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
so
And
that
and
makes a
it's
lot of
already,
sense.
yeah, and it's already happening with the Latin community. They have what's called promotoras. And so this is not the first time this is happening, but it is, again, meeting a person where they are, right? And understanding what their challenges are. So I think this integrated model of a peer support specialist and a therapist working together, and cost wise, if you think about it, it's going to help them so much faster
Yeah.
in terms of recovery versus just trying to have one or the other. And of course, again, peer support specialists do not in no way can support someone who's been diagnosed who's clinically not well.
Yeah,
But they are a huge support to the individual as they're going through the challenges
that makes sense.
or prevent them. The primary focus is to prevent them from becoming clinically ill.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I love
Yes,
when things make sense.
yes,
Yes.
fits in.
Yeah. So how can people support Mass SSF or
Mhm.
be in contact with you and be a part of supporting um, your cause?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of ways they can volunteer. What I really have a lot of need for is expertise.
Mm,
So if there's anyone who has a background in mental health or has an interest, I mean, we can train anyone to become a peer support specialist. It's an 80-hour training and then ongoing training after that. Um, and also, of course, the expertise in terms of helping develop programs is another area that I need a lot of support with. But more than that, I think currently in the climate that we were in, I think a lot of resources and a lot of support are needed for the refugees who are left alone now because the funding and the resettlement agencies have stopped.
mm.
We're going to see a lot of issues coming, and I'm talking about thousands and thousands of them
Oh my
who
gosh.
are going to have a lot of challenges and living a regular life. So I think resources and support for those is critical at this moment.
Absolutely critical. And I know you all do not turn people away when they
Yes,
knock on your door. This is
yeah,
what I've observed and
yes,
heard. Like you're going to take care of anyone who comes to you.
yeah,
So as a community, we need to support what you're doing as well.
absolutely.
Takes a village.
Yes, 100%.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Really appreciate you coming in and
Mhm.
speaking with
Of
us.
course. Thank you.